Benjamin Netanyahu will be the first Israeli Prime Minister indicted while serving in office. The Attorney General has announced his final decision to indict Netanyahu on 3 charges of corruption. But the current political stalemate with neither major party able to form a coalition government, it's not exactly clear what happens next. CNN's Oren Lieberman reports from Jerusalem.
Benjamin Netanyahu suffered his biggest blow as prime minister. This one not political, but legal. The first sitting prime minister to face criminal indictment in Israel's history. Netanyahu was defiant.
This evening, we are witnessing a governmental coup attempt against a prime minister by false libel and with a tenacious and contaminated investigation process.
The 70-year-old leader has spent years fighting against this very moment, proclaiming his innocence. Ever since the criminal investigations were made public nearly 3 years ago, Netanyahu has railed against them. A media-fueled witch hunt, he said, an attempt to topple him through the justice system when they couldn't beat him at the polls.
The time has come to investigate the investigators. It is time to investigate the prosecution that approves these contaminated investigations.
Israel's longest-serving prime minister faces charges in 3 cases. In case 4000, prosecutors say Netanyahu advanced regulatory benefits for his friend, a multimillionaire businessman. Those benefits were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. In exchange, prosecutors say Netanyahu received favorable news coverage from a news site owned by that businessman. In this case, Netanyahu faces the more serious charge of bribery, as well as the charge of fraud and breach of trust. In case 2000, prosecutors say Netanyahu was working on an arrangement with the owner of one of Israel's largest papers, Yediot Achronot. Netanyahu sought more favorable news coverage in exchange for limiting the circulation of the paper's rival. Netanyahu faces a charge of fraud and breach of trust in this case. Finally, in case 1000, prosecutors say Netanyahu received valuable gifts such as cigars and champagne from overseas businessmen, gifts they say a public servant shouldn't have received. Here, Netanyahu also faces a charge of fraud and breach of trust. Attorney General Avichai Mendelblit called it a very sad day for Israel, but rejected any idea that this was a political decision against the prime minister.
This is not an issue of right or left. It's not a matter of politics. This is a duty that everyone has to obey. This is my duty towards the public, that everyone will live in a state where any accusation of illegality is going to be checked and investigated.
Netanyahu's rival, former IDF Chief of Staff Benny Gantz, called on him to step down. He said of Netanyahu, he is well aware that the grave and complex challenges facing the state of Israel, both in terms of security and in the societal and economic arenas, require a prime minister able to invest his full time, energy, and attention. Netanyahu failed to form a government twice. First after April's elections, and then again after September's elections. For months now, Israel has been stuck in political deadlock. That deadlock now protects Netanyahu. As long as no one can form a government, he remains prime minister. Oren Lieberman, CNN, Jerusalem.
Earlier, I spoke to Reuven Hazan, a political science professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I asked him what happens next since Parliament was dissolved back in May and a new government is yet to be formed.
The Knesset dissolved itself, but the Knesset was re-elected in September. So as a parliamentary system, we do have a legislative branch that is in office and can function. The first task of that legislature is to establish a majority government, which it can't seem to be able to do. So we might be heading full steam into a 3rd election that will be in March. But at some point, the Attorney General can tell the Parliament, you have been elected, you are in office, get a committee together and get this done. If not, it'll go to the Supreme Court.
Everything ends up in the Supreme Court, it seems, ultimately in Israel, which is a great part about the system. It works, I guess, ultimately. Right now, neither major party, as you mentioned, able to form a coalition. So, what, a 3rd general election in 12 months? This could be dragged on, till next year? Then there comes this question of immunity. There's an opinion piece in Haaretz, and it finishes with this. It will be a toxic and divisive confrontation between Israelis who believe in the judicial system and those who've been convinced that the elites are out to suppress them. Is that how you see the coming months?
Well, what we saw last night with Netanyahu's response to the Attorney General is probably the beginning of the election campaign. And you can put it under a nice category of the Attorney General announced that the court case will be the State of Israel versus Benjamin Netanyahu. And last night, Netanyahu announced that it'll be Benjamin Netanyahu against the State of Israel and the ruling elites. So you're definitely correct on that. The election campaign will be divisive. It will not be about economic, social, security, foreign policy issues. It'll be a referendum on Benjamin Netanyahu. And you could see some people who supported him as a politician realizing that maybe it's time for him as an indicted criminal to go.
Thanks again to Reuven Hazan. Now,